you didn't plan to leave, I guess. Your family
Well,
didn't
there was
plan
no
to
way of
leave,
leaving
or-
at this
okay,
point.
you were stuck.
Problem, and even if we had known ahead of time, I don't think my father would have left. Because Dad's feeling was the point, and I remember him telling this, was the fact that we could run, but the Filipinos can't run. And what will the Filipinos think of me running and leaving them stranded here when I'm here to help them as a missionary? So I don't think Dad would have gone if he had been able to go. By the time we knew, it was impossible because the boats that brought those people to the Philippines, they packed up and left Monday night in the dark, and all the passengers were off the boat. They didn't notify any of the passengers, just left them. The boat just picked up and went because they knew if they didn't, they would never get out. So they left, and that's what happened. So.
Your father's sense of service is very strong. He said that was
Oh,
the
yes.
right thing to
Oh,
do.
yes. Oh, yes. There's no question about that.
Very admirable.
So he had learned the Tagalog language so well that when he preached on the radio, the Filipinos did not know it was American because his accent was like a Filipino.
Wow.
Many Filipinos say he spoke Tagalog better than they did.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Prior to Pearl Harbor, do you remember you or your family worrying about the world situation or the threat of the Japanese?
Yes, we did in one sense because of the servicemen that were there. But one of the things that hit us, in 1938, we'd been to the States on furlough, and when we were going back, we pulled into Japan on the boat that we were traveling on, just at the time that Hitler was attacking in Europe, and we wondered at the time whether we would ever leave Japan because we knew of the association between the Germans and the Japanese. But the Japanese weren't prepared at that point to start war, so they let us go, and we went on back for the next 2 years. So it was always probably in the back of our minds, but not to the point that we thought that they would do what they did.
And with the soldiers living or coming to you every weekend, you probably did know a little bit. You would listen to what the soldiers would say in your house.
Yeah, and
so you had a little more intel than somebody else.
Yes, in one way, and yet it was interesting that many of them really did not talk too much about it. I think they knew a lot more than they were communicating to us. For instance, the last Sunday, there was a serviceman who was stationed in Cavite, and he had a car. So he said as he went down the stairs that Sunday, he says, "I'm having my car service tomorrow and bring it back to you, because if war comes, we will be bombed, but you will not be." And we never got back because that's when Pearl Harbor was happening. So they knew a lot more than I think they communicated to us.
Right.
Okay. As civilians, they were probably trying to keep us from getting worried. And
right. And they were doing a great job.
Servicemen, they had to keep them all shut.
Right. That was good.
One thing also, probably when the Japanese came in and started bombs, they waited until it was lunchtime and the pilots were on the grounds with their planes, and then they came over, and so they destroyed the U.S. Air Force. That's why then they could come in. Oh, I'm so fascinated. I had practically every book written.
So you know because you've read a lot of that.
Just read and hearing him tell it, and he's been. But
and
I was in the Philippines after the war, but I didn't meet him.
And that was my next question. He did a lot of talking throughout your lives together.
Oh yes. And of course, when they came home after the war, his father had a film that was produced by the photographer with the 11th Airborne, and he showed that film and he went to the churches, because they all wanted to hear that. And so, then when we were, this is interesting, but when we went to get met by one of the photographers, and we were looking around, I didn't like anyone, I said, let's go to my high school photographer, Westfield. And so we went down to Elizabeth to the photographer, and we said we wanted a good set of pictures because Len's parents were back on the way back to the Philippines. And he said, Philippines, and it turns out that he was the photographer that jumped with the 11th Airborne, that took the pictures that his father was showing all around the country.
What a small world.
It was just so fascinating. He was just so excited.
Oh my gosh. Did you know about the rape of Nanking or the buildup of defenses in the PI, etc.? I apologize, I don't know what this question means.
We did not know until after the war was over that this was going on. We did know about the rape of Nanking, yes, but that we had heard of. But we did not know that the Japanese at the time, prior to even Pearl Harbor, during that year, maybe even a year and a half before that, were bringing in so-called farm equipment, which was really guns and all the rest of it that they were setting up up in there. We knew nothing of that until after the war was over. But that was taking place, and the authorities, maybe the Philippine authorities, knew something about it, but they were not knowledgeable enough to stop it.
Describe the initial stages of internment. How were you rounded up and where were you?
When the Japanese came into Manila on the 2nd of January 1942, they started going around and picking up the Americans who were in their homes and taking them to Santo Tomas. We watched, our house was such that we could look out. Mother had vines growing around the windows, so we could look out through the vines. They couldn't look in. And we could see them going around. We wondered when they would come to us. They never came to us. But they gave an order that in about February 15th, if you had not been picked up, you had to report to the concentration camp. And so we reported that morning, packed up our things, and went down. And when we got there, they were putting all the missionaries to one side. And when we all sat there for the morning, wondering what was going to happen to us, because we knew what they had done to the missionaries in China. And so all of us kind of expected, well, maybe this is the end for us, and that's why they're separating us. And so we sat there till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they came out and told us that because of the fact that the Philippines was such a religious country, they were going to allow all the missionaries, regardless, domination, Catholics, Protestants, to go back and to serve their people and to tell the people that the Japanese were there for their good. Of course, that never happened, but we were allowed to go back home. So we were never in the camp at that point. That was in February. So from that time until 1944, we were in house arrest in our own home and allowed to go to church or shopping and so on. But that was the life for almost 3.5 years. But so during that time, I had my 18th birthday. When I had my 18th birthday, then they wanted to take me into the concentration camp because I was military age. And we had Japanese neighbors prior to the war. So my parents went to those Japanese neighbors and asked if they would sign for me so that I did not have to go in and be separated from the family. They wanted to keep the family together. So he signed for me. He did not realize what he was signing when he did, because he didn't know that I wasn't the good boy that I was supposed to be.
Oh, the interview's going to get more interesting. Okay.
Oh, well,
So this during these 3 years, there was a number of things that were taking place. All of our income was coming from the States, and so that was completely cut off. So there was no income. So my father made arrangements. He had very good friends in Chinese who were in the Chinese churches, and so he made arrangements with them to borrow money. But the money he borrowed was Japanese issued money, what we called Mickey Mouse money, because it was pesos, but it was made by the Japanese, would be worthless after the war was over, and these businessmen would have a whole lot of this money, and they'd lose an awful lot. So they made some kind of arrangement with Dad that they would give him so much money, and at the end of the war, he would repay them at a certain rate in dollars, so that they would not be losing all that money. And that was helping us, because that was what we were living on. But also, I went to work because I had a German friend, and so the two of us got together and made peanut butter. He sold it to the Japanese and the Japanese Navy, and I would make the peanut butter. You buy the peanuts, you roast them, you grind them into peanut butter. You put it three or four times if you want smooth. If you want the peanut in there, you only do it twice. So I would make 300 pounds of peanut butter a week and sold to the Japanese Navy.
And that would help your family.
And that would help us, so we had some of that money.
Also made orange marmalade.
And well, the orange marmalade was before the war that I made. I used to make orange marmalade and sell it to the missionaries.
He is a man that cooks, so I like him.
So that was part of it. But one of the things that probably for me was we were given armbands to wear. That meant that only one member of the family was allowed out at one time. They were afraid, the Japanese were afraid that there was a lot of Germans there. And of course, to the Japanese, to look at an American, a white blonde fella, and a German, they couldn't tell the difference. And they would be ashamed if they asked a person if he was an American and he was a German. So to distinguish, they made all the Americans wear armbands when they were out. And so every time I went to town to do some shopping, I had to wear the armband. And I always wore a long sleeve shirt, rolled it up, and put the armband there. And then I would tuck it down in so that it would be hidden from the Japanese. And if I was stopped, then I would say to the Japanese, which I was at one time, he wanted to know if I was American. I said, yes. He says, where's your armband? He says, I cannot see it. Oh, I said, I'm sorry. It must have slipped down and satisfied. I mean, those are the kind of things. Japanese. One night I had been out with friends. It was a hot night, and I was coming home, and I heard the Japanese. You always hear them coming. They wore cleats on their boots, and one of the fellows always had a sword that was dangling, and I heard these four fellows coming, and these dated in my mind: should I run or should I just nonchalantly keep on walking? Well, if I run, they'll probably shoot and ask questions after, so I just walked on, and they caught up with me, and for 20 minutes, the man pulled out his revolver and kept poking it in my chest while he was interviewing me as to why I was out at that time of night. And I finally persuaded him that since it was a hot night, I was just out for some exercise and fresh air, and he let me go. And so, but for 20 minutes, he had his revolver, big Roman trigger, poking me in the chest. And then the other interesting part for this was the fact that we had all our radios taken away from us, so that because they knew that if we had a radio, we were listening to Voice of America. So one of my friends and two brothers, they were Filipinos, but they had some American blood in them, and the two brothers kept the radio up in their attic, and they crawled up there at 11 o'clock every night and listened to Voice of America. And then they would type up the news on a little sheet of paper, and then myself and a Chinese fellow would go to the house and pick up our paper Sunday every morning of the news. When I left the house, before I memorized it, I would roll the thing up small, take the handle grip of my bicycle and put it in the grip, and then put it in. So if I was stopped, they wouldn't find it on me. And then when I got home, I would memorize it. But there was a fifth member of the party who was Earl Hornbostel. He was in the concentration camp. He was an electrical man connected with communications and so on. And he was in Santo Tomas. And we wanted to get the news into them because they have no radio in there. So I would go every day, and there had a long table at the gate where you could meet with your friend across the table, Japanese guards at each end, and you could take them food up to a certain point. There was a time when this was taken away from us, but up until probably a year and a half after they were in Santo Tomas, we were allowed to do this. So I would go every day and take Earl something, and then would devise a way to get this piece of paper across the table to him. But we knew we didn't dare pass it across because these two guards we didn't dare communicate it because even though they never spoke to us, we were convinced that they must know English or they would be put there. So we took the piece of paper and rolled it up very fine and put it in a fountain pen. We took the tube out where the ink is and put it in there. And I'd start writing a note to a friend, and my pen would run out of ink. I said, lend me yours. And so we would pass the pens across. His was empty and mine had the news in it. We kept this up for 9 or 10 months. We did this.
And you
Never got caught. One day I was going for my news broadcast sheet of paper, and the Filipinos came yelling at me, don't. And I thought, what do they know? They don't know. Well, everybody must have known because as soon as I drove by the house, there was a Japanese truck in front, and they had caught the two brothers, found the radio, and they took them into prison. They found the Chinese man, and they knew who Earl Hornbostel had got him, and picked them all up. And for 2 weeks, one of the brothers said that every day they came to him and, do you know where he lives? And he said, well, I think I do. But he says, I conveniently lost my memory when we drove by your house. And so for 2 weeks he drove by, and I was never picked up. But the other fellows were. The oldest brother was taken out, and they never heard from him again. We believe that he was probably executed Japanese style, which is you dig your own grave, then kneel in front of the grave and they behead you. And but the other, Hornbostel, the Chinese man, and the other brother, were to be executed. But before their execution, 2 or 3 days before their execution, the Filipino soldier guerrillas up in the hill came down and released them. That's how I found out all this information, because I talked to that brother after the war was over. And so they were all released at that point.
And you were lucky.
And I was lucky.